Welcome to History Comes Alive, the podcast that takes you on a deep dive into a new historical topic every episode. Join us as we explore the nuances of historical events you probably didn't learn about in school. Here's your host, Jeff Nichols.
Welcome back. This is the bonus episode, the pre-episode of the fourth and final episode of our study of Massasoit, the Wampanoag Sachem, and friend to the Pilgrims. His life, his dedication, his contribution to the success of Plymouth Colony. We've got a lot to cover this week. So this bonus episode is meant to set the stage for a little deeper understanding of the native society, what some of the actions meant and how they were perceived by the natives. It's not a necessary portion for our study to understand the dramatic narrative, but it will certainly add some depth to our study. It's not an exhaustive study. It's not even really a comprehensive examination of the spiritual or the religious aspects of the natives. But I do think you will find this brief overview interesting enough to listen. A lot of this short episode comes from various portions of Karen Ordall Kupperman's book, Indians and the English Facing Off in Early America. She did a great job of developing some of the backstory of the scenario that I've been working through. It's not my single source, but certainly she deserves the lion's share of the credit for the quotes and the mindset of the folks that I'm going to relay here. I mean, the soapbox and the monologue, that's all mine, whether it's good or bad. But I want you to understand I hesitated as to whether I would include this information or not, or how I would incorporate it into the larger storyline. I mean, at some point, I'd like to do a much fuller, longer episode, maybe even a few episodes on the religious aspect of native life, in general terms, like a study of European religious practice. I mean, I say specifically European here because that's the foundation of the North American colonizers. There's enough nuances and distinctions to create a lifetime of podcasts. But there's also enough commonalities to at least come to a rudimentary understanding pretty quick. And that's the goal here. Kupperman offered a lot of really good information that dovetails so much of what we've already developed and will really help to magnify the serious nature and impact of the service rendered to the Pilgrims by Massasoit. Now, previously, we talked about his appearance on the scene as well as some of the things that happened. Pivotal events in the life of Plymouth, in the lives of Plymouth. Perhaps one of the most endearing and lasting gifts that Massasoit gave was the decades of native guidance. From the earliest times, these advisors helped to settle Plymouth by teaching the English about food production, hunting, and navigation. And they also taught them about the greater native community around them. And the real long-term aid was actually diplomacy. Now, the two leading, most visible ambassadors were Squanto and Hobomock. We definitely want to develop each of them in a little more detail. I mean, I get the feeling by the end of this bonus episode and the episode that follows that you're going to ask yourself why Squanto has received all of the glory over the centuries and Hobomock is all but forgotten in the larger narrative. Well, I mean, at least I asked that question. Except history belongs to the victor, to he who frames it. And William Bradford, who framed most of the Plymouth history, was a Squanto guy. So like all developed cultures, the natives of the New World had defined, recognized societal positions. They had organizational structure. And if you remember, that was a consideration of European colonialism. How organized was the social structure of the locals? The Europeans figured if the geography couldn't support an organized population, then it wasn't worth their while to colonize. So by social structure, we would mean leadership and hierarchy, observable territories, the ability to produce food and goods, but also religion or spiritualism or something other than the basic reality that we all live in, a way to explain the unexplainable, a way to instill and understand a core set of mores and beliefs into the masses that drive culture, a way to encourage certain behaviors and discourage others. Remember, it was Karl Marx that said, religion is the opiate of the masses. And to that, Jeff Nichols would add, find out what a people rallies around, their cultural centerpiece. and you find out their vulnerable point, what makes them tick, or why and how they make decisions. I mean, what drives and unites them? What compels them to do what they do? It's usually religion of some kind from the greater gene pool of any society. And there was a debate in those days as to the extent or the organization within the native cultures religion played. The Pilgrims and their Puritan counterparts in New England, as well as Europeans up and down the eastern coastline, experienced similar thought-provoking activities and events, not explainable outside the realm of religion or spiritualism. And Thomas Morton, an antagonist of Plymouth and a quote-unquote native insider, a friend to the natives, primarily the Massachusetts, refused to acknowledge an organized religious order. But let's explore, and you be the judge, in part by the record left to us by Thomas Morton himself. Now, he began his review, quote, of their religion, end quote, with the, quote, common received opinion of Cicero that there's no people so barbarous but have some worship, end quote. Morton went on to say that even Cicero would reverse this opinion if he had spent time with the natives of New England, more specifically the Massasoit tribe. And as we'll see, that specific reference to the specific tribe alone speaks volumes, perhaps, of the divide among the English at this point. The Massasoit tribe would present a great danger to Plymouth, and again, Morton was no friend of Plymouth. Ironically, though, Morton also reported, quote, yet are they not altogether without the knowledge of God historically, for they have it amongst them by tradition that God made one man and one woman and bade them live together and get children, kill deer, beasts, birds, fish and fowl, and what they would at their pleasure, and that their posterity was full of evil, and made God so angry that he let in the sea upon them and drowned the greatest part of them that were naughty men the Lord destroyed, end quote. So honestly, even the skeptic offered reports similar to others. Morton wrote that the Indians believed God makes corn grow and trees grow and all manner of fruits. The Carolina Algonquins believed that there was one great God, maker of all things, that created other gods for assistance, and this God created woman and then man. In another account, Morton wrote of a certain powwow, a powerful, influential religious leader, not a meeting, and his activities. And Morton compared the powwows to the European understanding of witches. Now, it's not the 2021 American concept of witches, but rather the concept of witches in the 1620s. And for clarity's sake, think Salem, like 70 years later. One of these powwows, Papasequinio, I have to say these names a few times sometimes. If anybody out there actually has the name Papasequinio, or you know somebody that does, and I've mispronounced it, and you recognize that, all apologies. But Papasequinio was reported to have swum underwater across a wide river. Morton attributed the feat to trickery. He said that the powwow, Papasequinio, cast, quote, a mist before their eyes to hide him coming up for air. I mean, really, he couldn't have swam a long way underwater, but he could create a mist to hide their eyes? The whole thing sounds a little crazy. But the reality is, whatever your view on religion or spiritualism is, there are numerous accounts from many opposing sources that tend to build a larger model or picture, with nuances being recognized between the groups or the regions, just like you would find within Christendom, Judaism, Islam, or any of the other belief systems of the world. There's three basic needs, or so I was taught long ago in school, for every human being: food, shelter, and clothing. And I would add to that, I would list four fundamental philosophical questions that can be answered in religion. And I know that can invite just tons of scrutiny, but let's focus on the larger concept here. We can save those, philosophical religious debates for later. But the four questions then, we all need food, shelter, and clothing. But then rallied around a society and how it's organized, there's four philosophical questions that can be answered under the umbrella of religion. Who am I? Why am I here? What am I to do? And how am I to act? The religion of the natives was as comprehensive as the Europeans. It appeared as a distinct cousin. Many people saw it as a similarity, an ancient connection possibly to Judaism. Many of the Puritans recognized remnants of what they thought were the 10 lost tribes. The basic concepts of prophet, priest, and king, and the concept of a good God and an evil God, the concept of an afterlife for good guys, a paradise, and evil guys, fire and torment, and the way the native women gave birth. And there was even some Eastern concepts of reincarnation thrown into the mix. And there was much consideration of spiritual beings. Roger Williams reported that the Narragansetts attributed everything they could not understand to gods or to divine powers. Their spiritual leaders claimed to cross over into the spiritual realm, and they exercised magical powers in front of the people. And the people fawned over them and made them very wealthy. They gave them lots of material things. I picture it kind of like a rendition of some modern faith healer, or like the sorcerer Simon from the Book of Acts. And this happened much to the disgust of both Roger Williams, the pilgrim, and Thomas Morton, kind of the anti-pilgrim, who denied they had organized religion. But these men claimed to learn from dreams, similar to many of the Puritan types, like, again, Roger Williams or Cotton Mather or Thomas Shepard. They may not have always gotten their sermons or their word of God from dreams, but each of those men had claimed to learn from dreams as well. And there were interviews and reports of near-death experiences by both the quote-unquote good guys and the quote-unquote bad guys among them. The good guys reported a nice place, and the bad guys spoke of a place of eternal fire. And the observance of religious ceremonies, spiritual beliefs, and cultural norms was the responsibility, by and large, of the spiritual leaders. And what was it that Karl Marx is reported to have said? Religion is the opiate of the people. The two prominent titled positions in New England were the powwows, and again, this is not a meeting, but a real person, who specialized in healing and religious services, and the nieces, who, as we've said previously in the last episode, were the military types. They were the warriors. And both of these groups were believed to have had direct access to the spiritual realm and all the power that one could imagine that came with it. They saw the spirits and interacted with them in dreams. They could bring them into reality. It appeared that they could tell the future through prophecy. And they had real social standing and political power. And they enjoyed special relationships and added value to the leaders that they served. Reports of prophecies foretelling the arrival of the Europeans stretched up and down the coast, from New England to the Chesapeake Bay. And these religious leaders had real power. They rivaled the sachems. They were the cultural warriors. They represented the biggest challenge to the colonial invasion, both the secular and the religious. The Europeans realized that the natives operated within explicit religious beliefs, and these beliefs kept society organized. Now, many of the natives would undergo name changes if a major event had happened to them. Many of the natives would undergo name changes if they came to be recognized by certain traits or activities. And many of the natives would hide their true identities from their European quote-unquote friends, I guess for security's sake, for a host of reasons. Some examples are like Pocahontas was known as Amenute at birth, and then Mataoka later, I believe it's Mataoka. That was a nickname that meant playful one because of her pleasant, happy demeanor. Massasoit himself was also known as Osamaquin or Osamakin. Squanto was known as Tisquantum. Now, Hobomock may have well been a pseudonym. So in order to move forward with our narrative, I want to distill all of this down. I know I threw a lot of things out there. I didn't give a lot of detail to it. I don't know that it was necessary for this portion of our series, but I want to distill all of this down to just a couple of points that are going to help us to work through this final episode on Massasoit. And it will help us to have a little consideration inside of our larger consideration, something to kind of mull over. Because this comes from the mind, the perspective of the natives, what they thought, how they perceived the people and the events around them. And it may be very different than the Europeans. It may be very different than the chroniclers of their day. It may be very different than our own understanding. Remember, their entire worldview was collapsing. And that's something that I can only imagine. I have no direct experience with my entire worldview collapsing. Frankly, I hope I never do. But in addition to all the spiritual and the religious energy that they lived with, there were two primary gods. One was unknown but benevolent, a great and good god, distant from the people, called, among other things, Tanto, or Kiatan, or Kadantawit. But there was also another, active in the affairs of men, more directly involved, and this one could be dangerous. He was capable of good and evil toward the people, and he went by various names. In the New England region, the land of the Wampanoags, he was called Squanto or Hobomock. Well, how about that? The two ambassadors assigned to Plymouth by Massasoit himself went by the names Squanto and Hobomock. And Hobomock was a revered niece as well, a warrior spiritual man, maybe the closest confidant of Massasoit, and we'll see he and Squanto were more adversary than friend. Now, let's continue to fill out the activities of Massasoit in the life of Plymouth Colony by working through the final scenes that Massasoit himself set in motion. The final scenes that Massasoit almost lost everything to. The final scenes that made and preserved Massasoit's reputation in his day and beyond. And I don't know about you, but to me, this added information really does help the history to come alive.
Thanks for listening to History Comes Alive. We hope today's episode has given you valuable new information and inspired you to dive even deeper. Don't forget to check out Jeff's website, historywithjeff.com, and engage with Jeff across all your favorite social media platforms at History with Jeff. Join us next time as more history comes alive.